Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see you here Thursday, February 4th already. Still working on pages R6 and R7, going through the Midwest states, state names and capital cities. I appreciate you doing that yesterday and preparing for tomorrow's test. Here's what we're going to deal with. Obviously, I think you understand the region by now, what we're going through, this whole section. But we're going to really focus on these right here. These kind of weird, that's not a nice thing to say, but these, what gives it these odd shapes is what I'm trying to say for a lot of the state outlines. And maybe this map will help show it a little bit better if it actually come up. Come on, map. There we go. That actually shows the Great Lakes a little bit better. And let me even show you what we're talking about here in the Midwest region. You know, the fertile farmland and the different storms in the Midwest region. But we'll really talk about the waterways. That's what makes this, well, first of all, feeds all the farmland. It gives it nice fertile soil with lots of water. But it also has great shipping routes. And so much of the bigger cities that we know, not even necessarily the capital cities, but a lot of the bigger cities that have a lot of industry and factories and jobs and people living in them, are right on the Great Lakes or some of the major rivers. This is a map from outer space on what we call the Great Lakes. Now, you can see how this dominates the region. You can even see the outline of Michigan here, and here's the upper peninsula of Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota. Look at how many states are touching the Great Lakes, and you need to understand this lesson, the importance of those Great Lakes. So many states use them, and they are so important because if you remember back to our science lesson, most of the world is water. In fact, 3/4 or 75% of the water, of the Earth's surface is water, and that's oceans, right? Do you remember how small it was? I remember it was one of the questions in your science lesson about how much water we can actually is drinkable, meaning is not salt water. It's 1%. 1%. Most of the water in this world is salt water, which you cannot drink. It's so salty, our bodies can't handle that. We need fresh water. And yes, we went through the whole water cycle, right, where God designed it so water evaporates, it turns into a gas, and then condensates and turns back into water vapor in the clouds. It comes down as rain or snow or that. And so when it evaporates, the salt stays down, only the fresh water. So every time it rains, we're always going to have fresh water. It's amazing how God did that water cycle. But you guys also know we can't just wait for it to rain to turn on our faucet and get fresh water. That has to come from somewhere. And yes, this whole area is dominated by big major rivers and huge lakes and even lots of inland lakes. But that's what we're talking with fresh water, and believe it or not, it's actually quite rare in the world. That's why these Great Lakes are so important. There's not a lot of huge, giant lakes that have fresh water, meaning not salt water. Well, these Great Lakes do, and they are massive. Look at this. It almost completely surrounds the states of Michigan and Ohio and Wisconsin and Minnesota. We're talking about the Midwest region. A lot of times people will call this the Great Lakes region because the Great Lakes are so important. You can ignore this down here, talk about the city of Waukesha. I found this on the city of Waukesha's website, but just ignore this. The point of this is to show how many states are touching the Great Lakes. This is so important that it actually changed states' shapes. Literally, where the Congress put the state lines was dominated and changed because of the Great Lakes and how important it is to each state. This is what we're talking about here. You have Buffalo, New York, and you have Cleveland, Ohio, and Detroit, Michigan, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, and you have Gary, Indiana. Sorry, I couldn't think of the name. But big, huge cities, and you even have right here Minneapolis and St. Paul. I said, wait a second, that's not touching the Great Lakes, but They also use these waterways like the Mississippi River, and then they go up the Illinois River here to the Great Lakes, and they can easily ship tons and tons of cargo and goods to all over these states, and they go down here, down the Hudson River into the ocean, and they can go all over the world. That's how important this is, and not just important for shipping routes, but it's also important just for fresh water. I mean, take a look at all these different big cities that are all right on these Great Lakes, and how important it is to both our nation's economy, which means the money that comes in and out of our country, and also the goods that can be passed on. Remember when I talked about how the fertile soil of this area is a lot of great corn, a lot of great wheat, not to mention the different livestock, the beef, the dairy that comes from dairy cows. All that different stuff can easily be shipped all over the world, and so much of the world's produce comes from this area, all because, one, they have great land that God gave them so they can grow it well, and number two, they can ship it literally anywhere in the world between the rivers and the Great Lakes. Now, this is kind of some fun facts about the Great Lakes, but I need you to understand again the importance of fresh water. Yes, we still need water treatment plants to clean the water and filter the bad stuff out, but if we do that with ocean water, it is incredibly expensive, incredibly time consuming. It's not an easy process. When we do that with fresh water in the water treatment plants, literally it's water getting treated or cleaned so that when you turn on the faucet you get a nice good glass of water, right? It's a lot easier to do with fresh water because you're not getting that nasty salt out, right? But just let me read some of these facts here to you. The Great Lakes are the largest freshwater resource in the world and hold approximately 20% of the world's fresh water. Now, remember, all in the world, there's only 1% that's fresh water, and a lot of it's in the glaciers in the North Pole and the ice caps in the Antarctica on the South Pole, and a lot of it's even in the air and the clouds. And so the fresh water on the ground is not a lot. But the Great Lakes, even though it's not a lot, hold 20% of the entire world's freshwater supply. Let me say that again, 20% of the entire world's freshwater supply. That's incredible. 95% of the United States water supply, it comes from right here in the Great Lakes. That's just helping you understand. I know we have tanks up in the mountains in Arizona, and we have some rivers and things like that, but fresh water around the world is pretty scarce. And most of it in the United States is right here in these Great Lakes. There are 6 quadrillion gallons. Quadrillion. It's not a number we use very often, and I purposely did put all the zeros here because it takes up most of the page to just write zeros. But if you get a gallon of milk, it's kind of the bigger gallons that you might get from Fry's or Bash's. That's 1 gallon. That's 1 gallon. In fact, I have a gallon of water right here, right? This is 1 gallon. 6 quadrillion of those. Good luck if Auntie asks you to help you with groceries and you're taking 6 quadrillion gallons worth of water. I mean, that would take you lifetimes to do that. That's just how much water is in the Great Lakes. And which obviously you cannot do, but if you take all the water out of the Great Lakes and have it cover the entire United States, we would be under 9.5 feet of water everywhere. That's how much fresh water is in this area. And it's amazing how God gave us this in our country, and how it helps out the whole rest of the country and the world. Now, you might say, what in the world is this? Well, again, you can see the Great Lakes outlined here. Now, this is going, the United States Congress in Washington, D.C. sets a lot of state lines and boundaries. You can see here how all these have changed over the years and decades and such. But my point here is just to show you the importance of the Great Lakes. Now, you might notice some of this is looking really different from now. Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, they all look pretty similar. This is in 1787. Notice Illinois and Indiana and Ohio are cut right here, right at the bottom of this big lake, Lake Michigan. And notice over time how it's changed. They kind of split it up in different ways and different things. And by the way, a territory is before it becomes a state. The United States Congress set very specific rules about how to become a state. You have to have so many people, and at this time there wasn't a lot of people in these areas besides, of course, a lot of Native American tribes. However, when Congress started setting these, notice you can see in 1805, okay, we had the state of Ohio. Notice Michigan's not a state yet. Notice how Ohio, they gave a little bit more of this lake, Lake Erie, so that they could have more land on the lake. Let's fast forward to 1809. Notice what's happening. See this straight line right at the bottom of Lake Michigan? Michigan and Indiana are not a state yet, they're territories. And then, notice what happens a few years later when Indiana becomes a state. Do you see how they raised that line up a little bit? Because even Congress and the people of Indiana said, hey, these Great Lakes are incredible. They're great for shipping. They're great for fresh water. We need a little bit more. And Michigan, notice, is not a state yet, so they don't have any representatives that people voted on in Washington, D.C. So Congress said, yeah, Indiana, you're a state. Michigan's not. We're going to bump up your state line a little bit. Sorry, Michigan, you're not a state yet. And so that happened. Notice again, going all the way back to here. This was the original line for Illinois. Then Illinois becomes a state. Do you see how much that state line got pushed up? Literally, had it gone to the original lines, we would be talking about Chicago, Wisconsin. There is no Chicago, Wisconsin because Chicago's in Illinois. But here's about where Chicago is, right on Lake Michigan. If we would have gone right here, Illinois would have stopped here, but they said, whoa, whoa, whoa. And again, remember this, that Illinois, because they're a state now in 1818, they have elected representatives in Washington, D.C., and they said to Congress, hey, we need more of Lake Michigan because it's so important to shipping routes and stuff. So they bumped the line way, way up. Now, I want you to notice here this Michigan territory, but also notice we got Wisconsin coming in here. Notice what happens from 1818 to 1837. Michigan becomes a state, but Wisconsin does not. There's a little city here called Toledo. Let's go to this map here in 1837. You can follow my cursor. Toledo is in Ohio, Toledo, Ohio. But it's right on the border of Ohio and Michigan. And right around this time, in between 1818 and 1837, Michigan said, hey, Toledo is our city. And Ohio said, no, 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 no. Toledo is our city in Ohio. And they literally had the Ohio militia and the Michigan militia stand off against each other. Now, by militia, I mean the different state armies that they had. But they never fired a shot. They just kind of were doing it for intimidation, saying, no, Toledo's ours, Toledo's ours. And news of this got to Washington, D.C. and say, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, don't be starting a battle here, okay, between your state militia here. Here's what we're going to do. We think Toledo is in Ohio. So Michigan, don't get mad. Michigan, calm down. Ohio is going to get Toledo. But we're going to give you this swath of land up here, Michigan. Okay, remember when we talked about earlier in the week, said, why in the world is this part in Michigan? This is why. It's called the Battle of Toledo, even though there was no actual battle. But that's why this part up here is in Michigan. Remember why? Michigan is now a state. Wisconsin's not. Wisconsin doesn't have anybody say, hey, man, don't take away part of our land. Congress says, tough luck, Wisconsin. You're not a state yet. So that's why this part, what they call the Upper Peninsula, is part of Michigan. Why? Because in Michigan, you get part of the Great Lakes. Look at all this land on the Great Lakes, how important it is for fresh water and shipping. And so Michigan said, fine, Toledo, go to Ohio. We'll take that part. Then Wisconsin didn't have any say. And then later, of course, Wisconsin, a few years later, becomes a state. But they say, hey, give us that land. And Michigan says, nope, that's our land. Sorry. And so my point here is just you understand the importance of why these states got added. Their boundaries got pushed north, or they completely gave parts of land to certain states, all because of more land on the Great Lakes, because there's so much importance to these Great Lakes for fresh water, for their crops, for their animals, for themselves, for people, and of course for shipping. So, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. This is a picture of the Great Lakes, and yes, you can see the different state outlines. Here's Michigan, here's Wisconsin, Minnesota's way up here. But I'm asking you to write in the names of the Great Lakes. There's five of them. There's five of them. You have to look in your communities books. But again, write down the names of the 5 Great Lakes. That's your assignment for today. Don't forget, tomorrow is the test on the state names and the capital city names of this region. So don't forget about that either. Hey, Lord's blessings to you as you praise your Savior.